That it is day 25 of Donald Trump's war of choice in Iran. And what a day it was on that front, because today in the Oval Office, when the President of the United States was asked a very reasonable set of questions by reporters in the room about the status of negotiating with Iranians to bring an end to the war, something everybody should want, he decided it was the right moment to brag about an expensive gift.
They did something yesterday that was amazing, actually. They gave us a present, and the present arrived today. And it was a very big present worth a tremendous amount of money. And I'm not going to tell you what that present is, but it was a very significant prize. And they gave it to us, and they said they were going to give it. So that meant one thing to me: we're dealing with the right people.
I'm sorry, what? What was that? So the Iranian regime gave Donald Trump a present. He does love presents, we know that. A secret prize worth, quote, a tremendous amount of money. And that gift makes the President of the United States suddenly feel like he's talking to the right people. I mean, these are people who give expensive gifts. How could they be bad? How could they be? I should also note we don't know who he's talking to or what they're talking about or how those conversations are bringing an end to the war he started. And naturally, as they should, the press had some follow-up questions.
What about the Strait of Hormuz? Who's going to be in control of that?
That'll be opened very soon if this works.
How soon? And
is that nuclear related?
No, it wasn't nuclear related. It was oil and gas related.
Was it related to the Strait of Hormuz and the flow of...
Yeah, it was related to the flow and to the strait, yeah.
Was it bigger than a bread box? Was it smaller than a bread box? I mean, Trump just decided to play a guessing game with the press, dropping enigmatic clues about his Iranian mystery prize. So if you're thinking to yourself, the White House must have tried to clean up or explain those comments later in the day. I mean, believe me, that's a moment where you're hiding under your pillow, you're putting your jacket over your head, you're hoping nobody asks you about it. Of course, they're going to. Well, if you thought they were going to clean it up, you would be mistaken. The White House press office declined to answer any follow-up questions when Politico tried to clarify what the heck the president was talking about. But they report, Politico that is, that, quote, several people close to the White House said they were baffled by the president's remarks. No kidding. Of course they were baffled. And this was not even the only baffling thing Trump has said recently about these negotiations with the Iranian government. I mean, here he was just yesterday talking about efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
What about the Strait of Hormuz? Who's going to be in control of that?
That'll be opened very soon if this works.
How soon? And who's in control of it? Will Iran still be able to control the flow of oil?
Be jointly controlled.
By who?
Maybe me. Maybe me.
You want the United States to be in
me
control
and the Ayatollah, whoever the Ayatollah is, whoever the next Ayatollah. Look, and there'll also be a form of a very serious form of a regime change. Now, in all fairness, everybody's been killed from the regime. They're really starting off. There's automatically a regime change. But we're dealing with some people that I find to be very reasonable, very solid. The people within know who they are.
Okay, none of this is funny, but Donald Trump's lack of understanding of all things is a bit funny. I mean, he just 2 weeks ago was calling for Iran's unconditional surrender. Remember that? And now he's musing about overseeing the Strait of Hormuz in partnership with his new besties, the Ayatollah or a future Ayatollah, according to him. That was what he said. And again, he's negotiating with somebody about all of this. He wouldn't say who exactly, but he says they're very reasonable. And then there's what Trump's own Secretary of Defense is saying about his role in these so-called negotiations.
We see ourselves as part of this negotiation as well. We negotiate with bombs.
We negotiate with bombs. I mean, that's what Pete Hegseth said today in the Oval Office while standing right beside President Trump. You could see him, which is even crazier, given that just a few hours later we got this reporting from the New York Times, which said, quote, the United States has sent Iran a 15-point plan to end the war in the Middle East, according to two officials briefed on the diplomacy, reflecting the Trump administration's eagerness to find an off-ramp from the conflict. It was unclear how widely the plan had been shared among Iranian officials and whether Iran was likely to accept it as a basis for negotiations. Nor was it clear whether Israel, which has been bombing Iran together with the United States, was on board with the proposal, which seems like a pretty key factor here. So, just to recap, Trump claims his secret negotiations with secret Iranians are going so great that we're winning extra double super secret expensive prizes. Meanwhile, the Secretary of Defense is chest thumping about dropping more bombs on Iran. On the same day, Trump is sending Iran a 15-point plan, which we don't have any of the details about, and nobody knows if the leaders of the country that dragged the United States into the mess have even seen it. There's that. That's my summary. All of this seems like a big, freaking hot mess. And here's the thing. Donald Trump himself seems to realize it is a big, freaking hot mess. Because in the most Trumpian move imaginable, the president is now trying to pass the buck for this war onto Pete Hegseth.
I called Pete, I called General Kane, I called a lot of our great people. And Pete, I think you were the first one to speak up. And you said, let's do it.
I said, Pete and General Raisin Kane, I think this thing's going to be settled very soon. Here they go. Oh, that's too bad. Pete didn't want it to be settled.
This was all Pete's idea. Pete wanted to go to war. Pete didn't want it to be settled. If this war drags on, if it's a big hot mess, blame Pete. Look, the chaos and confusion coming out of this White House is maddening. It's scary. It's horrible. And it's worth asking the question, though, who benefits from all of this? Who benefits from a president and his staff contradicting themselves over and over, whipsawing back and forth on major decisions that affect the fate of the entire world and so many people in this country? Who benefits from Trump's random statements about secret negotiations that are so hard to decipher? Because somebody is benefiting from all of this, and it's not you. Trump first announced his supposed negotiations from Iran in a Truth Social post at 7:23 a.m. Eastern time yesterday morning. 7:23 a.m. Remember that time. But just 15 minutes before Trump's announcement, there was kind of an unusual spike in oil futures trading. Traders placed bets worth more than $500 million right before the price of oil plunged. Experts say it looks a whole lot like insider trading. In other words, it appears that one or more people likely knew that Trump was about to announce his so-called negotiations with Iran and made a ton of money off that knowledge. And it's far from the only suspicious trading we've seen take place around this war. I mean, today, CNN reports that someone using the betting website Polymarket has made nearly $1 million by placing remarkably accurate bets predicting U.S. and Israeli military action in Iran. Now, to be clear, we don't know for sure that any of these transactions were illicit. We cannot say for sure that this is insider trading. But all of this is eye-popping and certainly notable, especially when you consider who has access to this kind of information. I mean, for all their crowing about transparency, the Trump administration has been incredibly guarded about their decisions in this war. Just today, the Pentagon imposed new restrictions on journalists, even after a judge on Friday ruled that their previous limits on the Pentagon press corps were unconstitutional. And the New York Times reports today that Republicans in Congress are deferring to the Trump administration by refusing to hold any public hearings with Trump officials about the war. In other words, Trump wants to keep journalists and the public, you and me and your neighbors and everybody, from getting access to consequential decisions about this war. But at the same time, nobody in this administration seems concerned about the possibility that some MAGA bro with a White House credential could make $1 million betting on what's inside Trump's mystery prize box from Iran. And I'm sure people are betting on that. When Trump ran for president, he claimed, remember, he was standing up for everyday Americans by opposing new foreign wars. I didn't believe that. I doubt you did either. But now that he is president, he's launched a war that feels like it's almost exclusively about indulging his own whims, as well as the whims of other rich and powerful people in his orbit. Today, the New York Times reports that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has had multiple calls with Trump, pushing him to continue his war with Iran. And at the same time, Reuters is now reporting that Trump's initial decision to strike Iran came after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told him they could get revenge for Iran's failed attempts to assassinate Trump himself. All of this is maddening for every American who will bear the cost of this war. And just imagine how it must feel to be one of the men and women in uniform who are being asked to risk their lives for this. One of the people who understands that sacrifice is Senator Ruben Gallego. Before joining Congress, Senator Gallego served in Iraq as part of a Marine battalion. He lost his best friend to combat operations during the war. And yesterday, Senator Gallego held a town hall with veterans in San Antonio, Texas, where he talked about Trump's war of choice in Iran with people who have actually served their country. Here's a little look of what that looked like.
The most patriotic thing you could do, for veterans is to not send us to stupid wars.